Somebody tried to convince me yesterday that the reason the Not So Affordable Care Act was passed in its current construct was there are poor people that can't afford insurance. And the Democrats wanted to do something for the poor people who couldn't afford insurance to create some loyalty within a voter base. That would stand to reason, right? I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got poor people and you help the poor people, you believe you create some voter loyalty with that group of people who, for whatever reason, can't afford health care for themselves or just don't want to pay for it themselves. And that's another debate we can have for another day. How many really can't afford it and how many just don't want to pay for it? That's not the case. And what I tried to do yesterday is illustrate that a lot of times there's a shield, S-H-I-L-L, not S-H-I-E-L-D. There's a pawn in the game. And we believe that it's all about the few million poor people who can't afford health care. It wasn't about that. That's some of the commentary. It was not that's public policy. It was about the insurance companies and the health care providers and the government mandating that you've got to buy and utilize a product they service. I mean, it's unbelievable to me how some people still believe that this was all about a couple or several million poor people who couldn't afford it. Now, they did benefit. There's no doubt about it, because we got, we got vouchers and we got supplements and we got all these other sorts of things that makes it free. So you are getting free health care, but somebody's paying for it. So when you hear public policy and the definition, policy made on behalf of the public, that's my argument. And I think health care is a great illustration, because the majority of you believe the reason Obama and the Democrats made up the plan,
shoved it down our throats,
was because of the poor people who vote Democrat. No, the insurance lobby would have never let that happen. The insurance lobby didn't love poor people that much. The insurance lobby loves do-re-mi. And the public policy that is healthcare legislation in America today does indeed advantage a certain segment of our subset of our population that can't afford health insurance or choose to not pay for it. No question. Unequivocally, that is true. But that pales in what the healthcare industry profited or benefited as a result of the legislation. Don't ever believe that this was done for poor people. Very little in Washington is done for the little man. Always remember that. You may get caught up in the throes of the good side of the debate. I've told you the story about, my brother. I don't think he'd mind me telling you this. I mean, my brother's a business guy, sold my part of the business to him. There was an EPA when the Obama EPA director got so zealous in saving the planet. I mean, they were all about climate change. They still are to some degree, but they're not as bad as they were. We had a pretty radical EPA director. We had a pretty radical president. When you have a pretty radical liberal president, you have a pretty radical liberal EPA director. That's the way politics works. But my brother calls me one day he and about a couple of others. They had raised the threshold of raw particulates you could emit into the atmosphere, or lowered it. I'm sorry, you couldn't emit, but in the previous times you could emit so many million particles per 1,000 weight, or they measure these things in a kind of an odd way, but they had lowered the number, and he was in violation. A lot of other industries were in violation. I began to call some political friends of mine, find out that he's in good shape. Not in good shape because they love a guy building truck beds in a town with no stoplight. He's the little man. He just happened to be on the same team with 6 or 8 big corporate donors to both political parties. So I told him, hey, don't think they're doing this. I mean, don't think you're going to be okay because, they are enthusiastically in support of mom and pop businesses in town with no stoplights. I mean, don't fool yourself. You just happen to be on the big boys team on this one. And the big 6 or 8 companies that are lobbying against this legislation are not going to let it pass. So remember this, and then we'll jump to something else. Remember this. When you think of Obamacare, don't think of poor people. Don't think of people getting their health care subsidized. That's not why we've got the legislation. Think of the insurance companies. Think of the hospitals. think of all the health care providers, because the federal government now made law that you've got to buy something they sell. They don't give a damn who pays for it. You think the insurance companies care if the taxpayer pays for it or if the consumer? Of course they don't. I mean, the money ends up, and to illustrate that, I looked at these numbers again last night. April 1st, 2010, that was the beginning of Obamacare. United Healthcare, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, and Humana, the four biggest insurance companies, health insurance companies in America, their stock prices were between $26 and $53. Well, I mean, if people were getting insurance and not paying for it, would it stand to reason that the stock prices would go down? Now, I understand we've got a bull market. I get that. I mean, so you got to take that into account. So when the healthcare legislation got passed, the four big boys, 26 to 53. Today, the cheapest one's $198. The most expensive is $323. That's somewhere between a 500% increase and an 850% increase. They didn't pass healthcare legislation in America because they love poor people. There was a political narrative to tell there. Poor people and small people and mom and pop never get anything they want out of Washington unless you happen to be along for the ride. So it's not public policy, and that's what I've tried to argue the last 3 days. And emphatically, I am more emphatic than I've ever been that that's the way the world is working. Now, I'll go back to a kind of a conversation I had yesterday at lunch. I said, someone texted me during the show, what if we wake up one day and Washington resembles Paris today? That's going to happen. Really? That's going to happen. I've got no doubt in my mind. I was the crazy fool who told you that Trump was going to be president. I was the crazy fool who told you 6 years ago that the ultimate battle will not be with the Republicans and Democrats. It'll be with, the average everyday American and the elites in Washington. I've told you that since I came on the radio. You looked at me a little funny when I started down that road. No, man. I mean, the debate has always been about, conservatives and liberals and big government, small guys. Kid, you cry. No, I said clearly, we'll always have those dust-ups. We'll always have, a majority party and a minority party, and, one group wants to do this and another group wants to do that. I still believe that we're in base camp 1 of scaling Mount Everest or climbing Mount Everest in regards to where this populist movement is. Now, there's some out there who believe this is a blip on the radar. Thigpen's one. He thinks order will be restored and we'll get another president honorable and elitist and aristocratic like George H.W. Bush. God rest his soul. I don't buy that. I believe that all around the world, the average person living in that country, I can't say the average American, because the average American kind of cares what happens in Paris, but it doesn't affect him in the first person. And when you see a place like France, and I've read so much on this in the last couple of nights, Emmanuel Macron is probably the preeminent bureaucratic elitist in the world today. I mean, he really is. I mean, since Obama's not there, I mean, he's probably the most, he and Obama would be, kind of share the spotlight of the most esteemed liberal elite bureaucrat on the planet today. Well, Obama's kind of, exited stage left, and Macron is, the president of France. He is the one who went to Davos and drank the Kool-Aid. He wants to be the hero of the elitist class. So he comes home and he implements some fairly radical legislation, or really it's really government edicts given in the executive way. It's not really the legislative body that passes this. It's interesting. France has a president and a prime minister. They actually trotted the prime minister out to say, hey, we're revoking the law. We're not doing, Macron, I'm not going out there, man. Those people may, ain't no telling.
He'll throw something.
Yeah, may do more than that. So we got we got France, who has really steered to the left for a long, long time. I've read a lot where the French people aren't real crazy about the direction of the government of their country. Well, they finally got to a place where they had enough. They finally got to a place they said, no, you're not implementing whatever the percentage carbon tax is, and gas goes up to $7 a gallon. I can't afford it anymore. And I'm not sure that you guys know what you're talking about in relation to climate change. So what I'm arguing is this is the beginning. Brexit was a piece of it. Trump is a piece of it. The rioting in Paris is a piece of it. We are in a very revolutionary age in global politics. And it's not just about America. When you look around the world at the polling and why people vote in a certain way, there's a lot of mention of patriotism. You see, patriotism and all about loyalty to the country and all about America. I mean, people who were born in France believe France stands for something. It's got an image, a brand, something that the people of France believe in. The people of Germany, the same way. The people of Italy, the same way. And you don't hear much of this because we live in this new world order. You know, you hear the Angela Merkels and the Emmanuel Macrons and all these globalists who have dominated the discourse for a long time. And I think there's been a subcurrent of an undercurrent of a lot of people who say, nope. And I'm telling you, Rev, these things happen. They don't happen instantaneously, but they happen very spontaneously. And I think you're going to begin to see brush fires all over the world. I think, once again, Brexit was a big part of it. I think Donald Trump represents absolutely what I'm talking about. And I do believe that we get to a place in America that our government does something so outlandish and so offensive that we don't put yellow vest on because the government doesn't mandate. I don't know how many of you know that, but the reason it's called the yellow vest protest.
It's a little weird to me.
It's very weird, but it's, you live it in a government or a country that has kind of embraced big government until they don't embrace it anymore. How many times have I said that? It works until when? It doesn't work anymore. People take it until when? They don't take it anymore. So the French government said, well, man, they've embraced all these socialized medicines, and I mean, they've embraced all these government programs, and they've embraced, just an ever-intrusive and growing federal government. Surely, we can hoodwink them into believing that we're sure about climate change, that if we don't do this, we're going to be the biggest contributor to the demise of our planet. People aren't stupid. But if you keep pushing things down people's throats, sooner or later the elites will believe you're that stupid. But the yellow vest is because in France they passed a national law, saying that in every motor vehicle there must be a yellow vest in case that vehicle becomes disabled. And then you are to put that yellow vest on to let the proper authorities know that your vehicle is disabled. I mean, I don't understand that, but that's some big government mindset of wanting to, hey, you people don't have sense enough to wave cars down. We got to put a yellow vest on everybody. Well, somebody put a yellow vest on. And here's how it works. I mean, here's how I was going to work in America one day. Somebody's going to put a yellow vest on. Somebody's going to say, hell no. I'm not going along with that. That's enough. I've had enough of that. Joe Scarborough says Washington always wins. I disagree. I think the people at the end of the day win this battle. And if you don't believe it, look in Paris today. Rev, those aren't troublemakers. Those aren't rebel rousers. Those aren't hooligans at a soccer match. The majority of these people, from what I understand in some of the polling and the sample taking, they're regular, working class, middle class citizens of France who looked at Macron and said, you're nuts. You're nuts. And the only thing we know to do is protest and demonstrate. Now, the media will cover the protest in Seattle. When Air Force One lands in Seattle or somewhere, and the nut jobs are there to protest the president or any policy he may have. I mean, the media will cover that. Not a whisper out of Paris. Why? Because the media is on their team. The media drinks the climate change Kool-Aid. The liberal media drinks the progressive agenda. They're not going to shine the light brightly on anybody that may offend or potentially curtail this bureaucratic elitist belief that the planet will be uninhabitable in 20 or 25. It's phooey. I mean, it's nonsense. I mean, it's ridiculously ill-informed to believe that Macron was doing something. He wanted to be a hero amongst the Davos class. I mean, that's exactly what he wanted to do. And his people said, no, that's enough of that mess. And sooner or later, the American people will not just vote for Donald Trump or some other person who we find a bit different. They'll go to Washington. Mark my words. It'll be in my lifetime. Won't be today or tomorrow. But one day, the American public will have had enough. And as Joe Scarborough says, Washington always wins. There will be a day. I don't know when, but Washington will lose. I'll assure you of that.